I'm Delilah Owens, and at 23 years old, I've learned that my marriage to the sixth Prince, Silas Saxby, would never unfold as ordinary people might imagine. On the night my half-sister Camilla offered herself to my husband's bed, I felt not a trace of panic. Rather, it was my carefully chosen husband who lost his composure entirely. With one swift kick, he sent Camilla flying toward the lake, then came running to me with tears streaming down his face, crying, "My dear wife, I'm frightened." I could well imagine what Camilla intended to accomplish. It wasn't that she harbored any genuine love for Silas. She simply delighted in stealing whatever belonged to me. When she intercepted Silas, I was positioned behind a nearby ornamental rock formation, watching the scene unfold. I observed her approach him with measured steps, tears glistening in her eyes as she declared, "I ask for no title, no recognition. Even as a concubine, even as a mere servant attending to your needs, I would be willing." She was indeed beautiful. If judged solely by appearance, she was undoubtedly the most striking among all the Whitfield daughters, especially in that pitiable, vulnerable pose. Scarcely any normal man could remain unmoved. But how could Silas possibly be considered a normal man? He was precisely whom I had selected from among thousands, the one man in the entire kingdom least likely to fall prey to feminine wiles. Silas, the sixth son of our current sovereign, was also the only prince thus far to be granted the title of royal prince. Street gossip painted him as temperamental and cruel, with a face like a demon who shunned the company of women. There were even tales of how he had personally crippled a palace maid who dared climb into his bed. Certainly, street rumors carried little credibility, yet remarkably, not a single minister in the entire court dared offer his daughter's hand to this prince. But I was different. I was the only one who had schemed and maneuvered to marry him. My motivation was singular. That very rumor about him crippling the palace maid. As Camilla once again declared her devotion to Silas, I remained hidden behind the rock formation, leisurely consuming peeled sunflower seeds while quietly asking Fawn behind me, "Who do you think will emerge victorious, Camilla or Silas?" I was purely there for the entertainment. Such grand theater, available without cost, was a rare treat indeed. Fawn offered no response, simply pressing another handful of sunflower seed kernels into my palm while whispering her complaint. "He is your husband, after all. Your composure is truly remarkable." What was there to be concerned about? If Camilla suffered rejection at Silas's hands, it would be cause for universal celebration. Should she succeed, I would simply sacrifice myself to play the role of the stick that beats apart the mandarin ducks. Since I was present and observing, surely I wouldn't repeat the folly of my previous life, when, the day after their liaison, I had actually pleaded for Camilla to be granted the position of secondary consort, all for the sake of the Whitfield family's reputation. Naturally, I could never be so foolish again, and I trusted my judgment implicitly. Thus, I lowered my voice further and proposed, "Let's wager 2 silver taels. I bet Silas won't take the bait." Fawn clearly lacked appreciation for such sport and declined my wager, but this didn't prevent me from betting against myself. I resolved that if Camilla could succeed as she had in my previous life, I would request an imperial divorce decree without hesitation tomorrow, surrender the primary consort title to her directly, and find some remote place to live out my remaining years in peaceful retirement. However, if Silas resisted temptation, I would reluctantly proceed to settle the grievances I had suffered in my past life. With this determination, I turned my attention with great interest to the pair by the lakeside. I must admit, the rumors had been grossly unfair. Silas was genuinely handsome. Perhaps inheriting his mother's Western region bloodline, his features possessed a depth that surpassed those of our kingdom's typical men. Clad in his crimson wedding robes beneath the ethereal moonlight, he appeared like an immortal descended from the heavens. From my distant vantage point, I couldn't discern his expression clearly, but I could see his eyes fixed intently upon Camilla. She too wore a delighted expression, murmuring sweet declarations as she gradually drew closer to him. The distance between them steadily diminished until they were nearly touching. Fawn behind me couldn't help but whisper a warning, "Miss, you're about to lose your wager." Yet I remained completely unruffled, gesturing for her attention with my hand. "Why the anxiety? There's still some distance between them, and they haven't kissed yet." My words had barely faded when suddenly I heard a tremendous splash, followed immediately by a soul-piercing shriek of "Ghost!" Watching Silas leap about the entire rear courtyard while Camilla struggled desperately in the lake, I found myself momentarily stunned and asked Fawn, "What did I miss?" Fawn replied with complete composure, "Oh, you missed the delightful spectacle of our prince consort kicking the second miss into the lake." Silas's cries were so loud that within moments they had attracted a crowd of servants. With so many people present, my small hiding place could no longer conceal me. Even Silas spotted me and came running over. Like a man finding salvation, he threw his arms around my neck and began wailing, "Quickly, quickly. There's a ghost. A female ghost who looks just like you." Being strangled, somewhat breathless, I patted his hands until he finally understood my intent and loosened his grip around my neck. Yet even after releasing me, he continued clutching my arm, afraid to let go. He appeared genuinely terrified. His lips had paled from fear as he pleaded pitifully, "I'm frightened." He seemed even more different from the Silas of legend than I had imagined. That aggrieved, helpless expression was identical to my childhood pet, a large yellow dog who would hide behind my feet whenever startled. I couldn't suppress my impulse to reach out and pat his head comfortingly. Don't worry. It wasn't a ghost, just my half-sister." It was only when Fawn approached to whisper a reminder that I came to my senses. Though I had recovered, Silas had not. He remained absorbed in my words, then asked in bewilderment, "Your half-sister?" As he spoke, his eyes widened and his handsome brow furrowed deeply, making me marvel involuntarily at how, were it not for those damaging rumors, he would likely be the very image of masculine perfection that the noble ladies of the capital yearned for. Unfortunately, he possessed a mouth. True to form, just as I finished this thought, he lived up to my expectations by pointing at Camilla in the lake and unleashing a torrent of curses. "Damn you! Playing ghost in the middle of the night. Are you tired of living?" After this outburst, he turned back to me with pitiful eyes and asked, "Is there something wrong with her mind?" Observing the royal mansion's servants, who seemed utterly accustomed to such behavior, I finally understood the origin of all those rumors about Silas. During my brief moment of shock, the servants had already pulled Camilla from the water. The estate's steward had even thoughtfully provided her with a blanket. Silas appeared to be in a towering rage, continuing to threaten Camilla's life. It was the steward who approached to counsel, "Your Highness, today is your joyous wedding day with the princess consort. It would be inauspicious to shed blood." These words seemed to cast a binding spell upon Silas. He even had half a sentence stuck in his throat as he stood there dazed, slowly turning to ask me, "Really?" I nodded. "I suppose so." He deflated instantly, his expression both aggrieved and annoyed. After a long moment, he frowned with impatience and declared, "Hurry up and drag this offensive creature away." Offensive creature? I cast my gaze upon Camilla, wrapped in her blanket. Indeed, the description was quite apt. She was decidedly offensive to behold. Naturally, I didn't have Camilla escorted away, but rather sent someone to summon people from the Whitfield mansion. In the middle of the night, having an unmarried woman in disheveled clothing return to the Whitfield estate in a carriage from the Prince's mansion would certainly spawn all manner of tales by dawn. Perhaps the black could be transformed into white, achieving precisely what Camilla desired. When Reginald Whitfield and his secondary wife arrived, Camilla was still weeping. Her tears had simply moved from the rear courtyard to the front hall. Like Camilla, the secondary wife began dabbing her eyes before even entering, seeing her daughter kneeling on the ground from afar. Reginald maintained more composure, glancing once at Camilla without questioning her, but instead frowning as he asked me, "What exactly happened here?" Before I could respond, Camilla spoke up. She tugged at Reginald's sleeve and said in a delicate voice, "It's all my fault, not His Highness's doing. Father, please don't ask anymore. Let's just go home." Having finished speaking, she cast another tearful glance at Silas before quickly averting her gaze. She appeared exactly like a poor woman who had been violated, yet still wished to protect her violator's reputation. Seeing her in this state, how could the secondary wife possibly agree? Being clever, she dared not question Silas directly, but turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Delilah, as Camilla's elder sister, how could you permit your husband to humiliate your own sister?" Silas's explosive temper couldn't tolerate this for an instant. He slammed his hand violently on the table and launched into another stream of profanity. I patted his shoulder repeatedly until I finally managed to calm him down. Camilla apparently didn't realize I had witnessed the entire scene from behind the ornamental rocks, and continued her performance following the secondary wife's lead. "Mother, please say no more. It's all my fault." She had always favored this method of deliberate self-deprecation, speaking only half sentences to encourage others' imaginations. Admittedly, this technique was quite effective. In my previous life, I had suffered numerous secret losses because of it, but some losses need only be endured once. Watching the family of 3 before me awaiting an explanation, I couldn't help but slowly curve my lips and settle into a more comfortable position. "Oh? You claim my prince consort bullied her? Very well. Would you like me to have my prince consort take her as a concubine and bring her into the prince's mansion?" The moment the word concubine left my lips, the secondary wife's complexion changed dramatically. She stared at me with wide eyes, pointing and stammering "you" repeatedly, unable to form a complete sentence. Even Reginald's expression darkened considerably. The word concubine had always been a thorn lodged in their throats. Years ago, Reginald had abandoned the secondary wife to marry my mother for the sake of his career advancement. After his political fortunes improved, he became nostalgic for the secondary wife. Later, while my mother was 6 months pregnant, he secretly conceived a child with the secondary wife. Taking advantage of my maternal grandfather's absence on military campaign, with no one to support my mother, he attempted to take the secondary wife as an equal wife. My mother was no pushover. She successfully dissuaded Reginald from his equal wife plan by appealing to the Whitfield family's reputation. However, since the secondary wife was already pregnant with Reginald's child, she ultimately had to be brought into the household as a concubine. Perhaps due to this history, Reginald showered the secondary wife and her daughter with excessive favor. Though I was the legitimate daughter, my food, clothing, and living conditions were inferior to Camilla's in every respect. Even so, Camilla still believed that my mother and I had stolen what rightfully belonged to her and her mother. Consequently, she had spent years trying to surpass me in everything. I was naturally lazy, and though I understood all this in my previous life, I couldn't be bothered to compete with such calculations. When Camilla climbed into Rowan's bed the day after their wedding, I even proactively suggested that Rowan elevate her to secondary consort status to avoid future troubles. Yet for the sake of winning favor, she still bribed servants to secretly add contraceptive herbs to my daily meals. When Reginald learned of this, he merely offered a casual dismissal. "What does it matter if you have no children? Your sister can bear them, and since you're the primary consort, won't her children still call you mother? You can simply love those children as if they were your own." For the same father to show such favoritism was indeed quite laughable. True to form, he once again chose to defend Camilla without question, pointing at my nose and scolding. "She's your blood sister. How can you suggest she become a concubine? Our Whitfield family has treated you well all these years. How could we have raised such an ungrateful creature?" I raised an eyebrow at him. "Your Whitfield family? If you hadn't mentioned it, I might have thought I bore a different surname." He seemed to realize his mistake, his expression shifting slightly, yet he stubbornly continued. "All these years, I've treated you well." "Treated me well?" I laughed outright in disbelief, cutting off his words. "My mother had barely passed away when you drove young me from the main courtyard to live in the woodshed. Is that treating me well? In the depths of winter, even the servants had charcoal for warmth while I could only endure the cold in thin clothing. Is that treating me well? When my grandfather sent money and gifts from thousands of li away, you appropriated them without question to purchase fine things for your concubine and precious daughter. Is that also treating me well? You claim you treated me well. Tell me, when I was gravely ill and near death at age 10, did you visit me even once? For today's wedding dowry, did you contribute even a single item? Should I also thank you for graciously allowing me a mouthful of food and not letting me starve to death?" Watching the three of them gradually pale, my mood finally lightened somewhat, and I couldn't help but smile. "Oh, and about becoming concubine to my prince consort. Those weren't my words, but what your precious daughter personally said when she offered herself to his bed." Camilla clearly hadn't expected me to overhear her words. The moment I spoke, she instinctively began to deny it. I didn't. But before her refutation could leave her lips, Silas beside me began chiming in. "In the middle of the night, dressed like a female ghost, wanting to be my concubine? Bah! Even dogs wouldn't want her." His voice wasn't loud, but everyone present heard him clearly. Reginald and the secondary wife's expressions were spectacular, faces flushing red, then white alternately. Camilla was even more shocked, freezing completely. It seemed only then did she realize that Silas was unlike those men who fawned over and desired her. He couldn't be summoned with a few coy smiles and beckoning fingers. Seeing her in this state, Reginald and the secondary wife apparently understood what had truly transpired. Those who had been so aggressive moments before, demanding answers from me, now became as silent as mute gourds. The secondary wife and Camilla alternately sobbed and wept silently. Only Reginald, after a period of silence, suddenly softened his tone and addressed Silas. "Though my daughter was indeed rash today, she did fall into the water at your residence and was seen in her undergarments. Your Highness must provide some explanation for this, mustn't you?" Well now, this was an attempt to force Silas to take responsibility. Under normal circumstances, if Silas simply refused to acknowledge anything, Reginald would refrain from publicizing the matter for Camilla's reputation and would have no recourse against Silas. But clearly, Silas was far from normal. I watched him frown at Reginald, then suddenly rise and approach him. Before anyone could react, he swiftly pulled open Reginald's outer garment with a decisive swish. His movements were swift and decisive. By the time people realized what was happening, Reginald was already exposed with half his pale chest visible. Screams erupted throughout the room, while only Silas shrugged innocently. "I've seen you too. Shall I also take you as my concubine?" Reginald was nearly apoplectic with rage. He pointed at Silas's nose, wanting to curse, but not daring to. He could only point at me and threaten through gritted teeth that I mustn't let word of tonight's events spread and damage Camilla's reputation. Then he hastily departed with the secondary wife and Camilla. Reginald, at his age, had probably never suffered such humiliation. Just thinking of his expression of utter bewilderment filled me with delight. I couldn't resist patting Silas's head again in praise. Well done. Though he had just stripped Reginald's clothing with complete composure, only now did he seem to react, gradually reddening. He stared at me with moist eyes, his face full of anticipation as he asked, "Did I really do well?" His expression practically had the words, "Praise me more," written across it. My heart tickled with an inexplicable sensation, and I found this man, who stood a full head taller than me, somewhat endearing. I nodded involuntarily. Yes, very well done. At these words, his eyes suddenly brightened. I don't know how his thoughts leaped, but he suddenly stepped forward and grasped my hands. "Don't worry. They treat you badly, but I'll treat you well. From now on, consider this your true home. Whatever you desire, just tell me." Looking at his earnest, serious expression that seemed anything but joking, my heartbeat inexplicably skipped 2 beats. Indeed, the rumors had deceived me. Silas proved true to his word. Within less than half a month, he had filled my chambers with all manner of objects: gold and silver jewelry, silk fabrics, and fine cloth. Anything that caught his eye found its way into my room. However, his taste in these items left much to be desired. Those golden ornaments were both gaudy and impractical. The red and green fabrics were so embarrassing that merely looking at them made one cringe. I spent considerable effort persuading him to cease his gift-giving campaign. I wondered if it was my imagination, but Silas seemed extraordinarily enthusiastic toward me from our wedding day forward, as if we had known each other for years. Yet I was quite certain that whether in my previous life or this one, apart from briefly encountering each other at banquets, we had virtually no interaction. I began to suspect whether my rebirth had somehow cost me certain memories. Before I could puzzle this out, rumors gradually began circulating in the streets. Naturally, what spread wasn't Camilla's self-offering, but rather my arrogant and domineering behavior, how on my wedding day I had severed father-daughter relations with Reginald. Camilla had many close friends among the daughters of Reginald's court colleagues. As expected, within days, I received an oral rebuke and house arrest order from the palace. I felt little about this personally. Rather, it was Silas who seemed ready to explode with rage, running back and forth to the palace several times. I heard he threw tantrums and made scenes before the emperor, causing such a headache that His Majesty had no choice but to lift my house arrest. I was quite surprised, and finally couldn't resist asking him at dinner, "Have we met before?" This wasn't a difficult question to answer, yet he reacted as if struck by lightning, suddenly freezing completely. Even the meat on his chopsticks fell back into his bowl. He stared at me with wide eyes, not answering but instead asking, "You've forgotten?" "Forgotten what?" I inquired. Hearing my question, his chopsticks paused again, and a brief emotion flashed through his eyes. After a long moment, he put down his bowl and chopsticks sullenly. "If you've forgotten, then forget it. It wasn't anything important anyway." Though he said this, he still didn't finish his meal, leaving me alone as he departed. I pondered extensively but couldn't determine what unimportant matter he meant. Before I could find an answer, Fawn brought me good news. She handed me a letter, whispering, "That person says it's acceptable." After reading it, I burned the letter and slowly curved my lips. Then, let's send him a grand gift first. The day after my house arrest was lifted, new rumors quietly began circulating in the streets. These tales claimed that Reginald and the secondary wife had once been deeply in love, but my mother had played the role of the heartless third party, separating the loving couple. They also said that my break with the Whitfield family was because I had never held any real position there, enjoying far less favor than Camilla, who was the true apple of Reginald's eye. This discourse of favoring concubine children while destroying legitimate ones naturally aroused displeasure among certain ministers. However, since domestic affairs were difficult for upright officials to judge, even when the matter reached the emperor's attention, he merely issued a few rebukes. On the 5th day of these widespread rumors, I had Fawn arrange a seemingly chance encounter between Prince Hwai Rowan and Camilla. As expected, within mere days, Rowan sent formal marriage proposals through proper channels to the Whitfield household. Regarding my actions, Fawn rarely showed dissatisfaction. "She clearly spread rumors slandering you. Why are you still arranging such a fine marriage for her?" she asked, while I reclined in a rocking chair with my eyes closed, enjoying the cool air. "Who says it's necessarily a fine marriage?" In my previous life, Rowan had spent his wedding night with Camilla. Learning that Reginald truly favored Camilla, Rowan curried favor with Reginald by tolerating her shadowy schemes against me. Later, he even used me to orchestrate the destruction of my maternal clan, then ended my life with a cup of poison. I still remember the scene from my previous life's death, him forcing poison wine down my throat. He had said, "Delilah, did you think I was unaware of Camilla's actions? If not for your remaining usefulness, I would never have married such an utterly unromantic woman as you." Truly, there was no greater way to wound both body and spirit. Though I still hadn't understood why I had been given a second life, it didn't prevent me from settling the grievances of my previous existence. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but sigh. Tying two grasshoppers to the same rope, when one explodes, they both go down. How convenient. Rowan and Camilla's wedding came even earlier than I had anticipated, at roughly the same time as my marriage to him in my previous life. Shortly after their wedding, a major incident occurred at court. Nanyu County suffered flooding due to continuous heavy rains, drowning hundreds of people. This was the first severe disaster His Majesty had faced since ascending the throne. In my previous life, after the flood appeared, court ministers led by Reginald had suggested sending Prince Yong for disaster relief. Prince Yong never returned from that mission. Looking back now, among all the princes, Prince Yong was the most capable. For Rowan's ambitions toward the crown prince position, Prince Yong's death likely bore his fingerprints. However, in this life, before news of Nanyu County's disaster reached the capital, Prince Yong fell ill. He remained bedridden for dozens of days. Silas, who was close to him, even brought medicinal herbs to visit once or twice. True to my expectations, this time there were no voices in court suggesting a prince lead disaster relief efforts. Following ministerial advice, the emperor appointed Reginald as imperial commissioner for Nanyu County disaster relief. When he arrived, though the floodwaters had receded, plague had begun spreading and violent mobs frequently caused unrest. News of these situations periodically reached the capital, making the atmosphere increasingly tense. Before good news of Reginald's disaster relief efforts could return, the Empress's birthday arrived. The Empress was Buddhist, and given the ongoing disasters, had no heart for birthday celebrations. Yet, for unknown reasons, Camilla proposed using the birthday banquet as an opportunity for court officials to donate silver for disaster relief funds to send to Nanyu County. It was an excellent proposal. Unsurprisingly, their majesties agreed. On the day of the birthday banquet, male guests were seated in Cheongji Hall, while female guests were arranged in the Imperial Garden. Upon separating from Silas and arriving at the Imperial Garden, I immediately spotted Camilla, whom I hadn't seen for 2 months. She appeared radiant, chatting and laughing with a group of noble ladies. Those ladies noticed me and began whispering among themselves. Is that her? The one who severed relations with her father on her wedding day? I wonder what possessed Prince Yu to fancy such an unfilial person. Camilla naturally saw me as well. After saying something to the group of ladies, she rose gracefully and approached me with a sweet smile, calling out, "Elder sister." Our relationship certainly wasn't close enough for such intimacy. Having learned from my previous life's experience, I knew exactly what she was planning. I casually curved my lips at her. Oh, if it isn't Princess Huai, what a coincidence! I deliberately hid my hands in my sleeves. When she failed to grasp my hand, she could only take hold of my wrist. "Sister, why so distant? We're family. Surely you don't truly wish to remain estranged." While speaking such affectionate words, her expression changed at an angle others couldn't see, revealing a sinister glint. She even deliberately used a voice others couldn't hear to whisper provocatively, "Delilah, don't think leaving the Whitfield family means you can live happily. Everything that's yours, I'll steal away." Having said this, she suddenly yanked my arm and cried out as she fell backward. Camilla miscarried, and in everyone else's eyes, I had pushed her. In my previous life, this move had caught me completely off guard, resulting in significant losses. This time, watching her repeat the same trick, watching that group of noble ladies testify and accuse me before the Empress, just as they had in my previous life, I found it rather amusing. I truly did laugh aloud. Mother Empress, look at her. Even at a time like this, she shows no remorse. The speaker was the eldest princess. In my previous life, she had frequently supported Camilla's schemes against me. But the Empress didn't follow her lead to reach conclusions. Instead, she raised her eyes to look at me and asked, "Is what they're saying true?" I respectfully performed a curtsy before responding, "Your Majesty, all matters require evidence. These ladies all claim I pushed Princess Huai, but can they provide proof?" The eldest princess and the group of noble ladies apparently hadn't encountered someone so shameless before. They declared indignantly, "I saw it! I saw it too." Even the miscarrying Camilla emerged from the rear hall, supported by others, enduring her pain to question me tearfully. "Sister, we've been sisters our whole lives. Why would you harm my child?" Camilla, clutching her abdomen with that expression of imminent tears, was truly pitiable. She could act, but so could I. I frowned slightly, letting out a gentle sigh before saying quietly, "As I said, all matters require evidence. If you claim I pushed you, you must provide proof that I pushed you." Camilla's eyes reddened. "Sister, what are you saying? Do you mean I would harm the imperial heir in my own womb?" I replied, "Who can say for certain?" This somewhat arrogant remark clearly disturbed her circulation. Her body swayed twice, nearly unable to stand. After being supported with difficulty, she forced herself to kneel and tearfully begged the Empress, "I implore Mother Empress to seek justice for my unborn child." The Empress, who had maintained her position for decades, naturally wouldn't show favoritism in such situations or rush to conclusions. She fixed her gaze on me and slowly spoke. "They all say they witnessed it. Naturally, that constitutes testimony. You say it wasn't you. Do you have evidence?" This was precisely what I had been waiting for. "Naturally, I do." I looked toward Camilla and asked gently, "You say I pushed you. I'd like to ask which hand I used to push you." My calm, unruffled demeanor clearly rattled Camilla, but she still instinctively replied, "Your right hand." Right hand? I smiled lightly, revealing the hand I had kept hidden in my sleeve to everyone present, raising an eyebrow to ask Camilla, "Princess Y, please explain. If I pushed you with such a hand, why isn't there even a handprint on your clothing?" At that moment, my originally fair, smooth palm was covered with burn blisters, grotesquely swollen. A layer of brownish-yellow medicinal powder was applied over it, with pus occasionally seeping out. Even the slightest touch left a clear, visible bloody handprint mixed with the brownish medicinal powder on my sleeve. These noble ladies had never witnessed such a scene. Some immediately retched, while others gasped in horror. I slowly withdrew my hand back into my sleeve and explained to the Empress, "I accidentally suffered burns a few days ago. The physician said burn wounds shouldn't be bandaged, so I've been keeping them hidden for fear this appearance might offend distinguished persons." I then looked toward Camilla, imitating her aggrieved manner as I said, "I truly don't understand why Princess Huai would slander me so." Camilla hadn't anticipated this turn of events and was clearly panicked, stammering, No, sister used her left hand. I remembered incorrectly." "Oh? Left hand?" I raised an eyebrow, extending my left hand, which was in identical condition to my right, and asked her, "You're not about to claim I pushed you without using my hands at all, are you?" The assembled noble ladies all came from prestigious families. The sordid affairs of great households were all too familiar to them, let alone to the Empress, who dwelt deep within the palace. Without my explanation, everyone understood the situation. The Empress had always despised such scheming machinations. She simply said, "Let the imperial clan court investigate," and hastily ended this farce, dismissing the banquet. When leaving the palace, Silas from the male guests section had already heard of these events. His features were nearly twisted together in anger, and his speech remained as unfiltered as ever. "That ghost-like ugly woman, is her brain burned out? Or has she been soaking in an ink vat? Her thoughts are too malicious. If you ask me, she should be stuffed back into the womb for proper reforging." Though I was moved by his protective attitude, I couldn't help but ask, "Where did you learn such coarse language?" He blurted out, "From the young Marquise of Minyang's household." "Why?" The capital's famous wastrel who loved frequenting the markets. That explained it. Silas seemed completely unaware of any impropriety in his words and continued his tirade. How unlucky to encounter such rotten business upon entering the palace. This imperial palace might be incompatible with your fortune. We won't come any more in the future. As if we could simply choose not to attend when summoned. I knew he was trying to comfort me with these words. I also found his indignant appearance quite adorable. Just as I was about to tease him, our carriage suddenly stopped. The driver quietly informed us, Your Highness consort. It's Prince Huai." Silas clearly disliked Rowan and waved dismissively with irritation. Go quickly. Pretend we didn't see him." He wanted to leave, but Rowan wouldn't provide the opportunity. "Sixth brother, allow me to speak with Princess Yu." His words immediately made a vein throb on Silas's forehead. "My princess consort. You think you can speak with her just because you want to? Dream on." Had I not restrained him, he would have charged out directly to punch Rowan. Regarding this offensive creature Rowan, I truly had nothing worth discussing with him. My previous life's scene of him forcing poison wine down my throat remained vivid in memory. I feared that seeing that nauseating face would make me unable to resist drawing a blade to kill him immediately. Thus, I coldly declared through the carriage curtain, "Prince Y, unless it's something urgent, it's better left unsaid. I fear my prince consort might misunderstand." These words both rejected Rowan and soothed Silas. Indeed, the moment I spoke, Silas's expression visibly softened. He even grinned foolishly with a hearty heh heh, radiating pure simplicity. My words were quite direct, and Rowan didn't insist, merely laughing lightly. "Oh? It seems sixth brother has truly married an excellent wife." I also smiled, speaking with double meaning. "Not comparable to you, your wife is even better." Though Camilla's case of harming an imperial heir and framing me with her pregnancy was assigned to the imperial clan court for investigation, the matter could be major or minor. Reginald was the chief minister and an imperial commissioner abroad serving the emperor in disaster relief. If his relief efforts proved successful and Rowan chose not to pursue the matter further, this affair could be minimized. Not only I, but Camilla and the secondary wife understood this principle. Thus, on the morning after Camilla was detained by the imperial clan court, a swift horse galloped from the Whitfield estate out of the city, but I understood Reginald too well as a person. He was greedy by nature. Years ago, for advancement, he hadn't hesitated to abandon the secondary wife with whom he had pledged eternal love. During his years in office, the bribes he had secretly received were countless. With so much disaster relief silver in his possession, how could he possibly remain unmoved and completely untouched by it? Indeed, before the secondary wife and Camilla's plea for help could be delivered, the emperor received a secret memorial from Nanyu County. The document reported that citizens had discovered the embankment that should have been constructed with stone blocks and lime had been replaced with quicksand. When people went to the county office to demand a thorough investigation, they were suppressed by Reginald as rebels. Though plague had continued after the flood, Reginald not only failed to aid the people, but actually sent initially infected citizens who still had hope of survival to plague villages and burned them alive. Under the great fire, heart-rending cries shook heaven and earth. All were the kingdom's subjects who perished. The document detailed incident after incident, each more grievous than the last, with words written in blood and tears. The informant who delivered this secret memorial even stated that many others like him had attempted to travel thousands of li to the capital with similar reports, but all had been captured and killed by Reginald. That messenger himself died at the palace gates after delivering his memorial. Certainly, the document contained elements of embellishment. Nevertheless, the emperor flew into a rage and assigned the matter to the Court of Judicial Review for thorough investigation. The court worked swiftly. Before Reginald returned from disaster relief, evidence of his corruption and disregard for human life was completely laid out upon His Majesty's dragon desk. Within 3 days, the truth of Camilla's scheme to harm an imperial heir and frame me using her pregnancy was thoroughly revealed. It even uncovered her secret engagement and pregnancy with a Whitfield family protégé. The case also exposed how she had used secret drugs and aphrodisiac incense on my wedding day, attempting to seduce Silas. When Fawn brought back this news, Silas was before me, pointing to heaven and swearing an oath. Even if I had been affected by that whatever incense, I still couldn't possibly have been seduced by her. I naturally knew this. After all, no man would mistake a beauty for a female ghost, nor would any man kick a half-dressed woman who threw herself at him into a lake. Watching Silas's earnest expression, genuinely fearing I might misunderstand as he continuously explained himself, my mood lifted considerably without reason. Perhaps because we had spent more time together recently, I increasingly felt he differed greatly from the rumors. Probably because his mother was a beauty tributed from the western regions. His status was special. Though favored, he had never been considered among His Majesty's potential crown prince candidates from childhood. Perhaps precisely because no one had taught him imperial arts and governance, He had developed his current, free-spirited, unrestrained nature. I found nothing objectionable about his carefree nature, especially when, despite his anger, he still frowned with worry and asked, "With the Whitfield family's downfall, won't you be implicated?" In that moment, I burst into laughter, feeling increasingly that I hadn't married wrongly. "Don't worry," I soothed gently. "I'll be fine. After all, I severed relations with the Whitfield family on my wedding day, didn't I?" Camilla probably never imagined that those rumors she spread to slander me would spare me considerable trouble at this moment. I also hadn't expected that Camilla's motives weren't simply to steal my belongings. She had actually been secretly involved with someone else. No wonder she had taken such desperate risks, choosing to act on my wedding day. The gates of the Imperial clan court were as forbidding as I remembered from my previous life. In my past life, when I was falsely accused by Camilla of harming an Imperial heir and was tortured there nearly to death, she had come to visit me. At that time, she dismissed everyone and looked down at me with a victor's smile, speaking with contempt. "Delilah, so what if you're the primary consort? You're still caged here like a dog." She had said, "That's right, I deliberately framed you, but so what? You have no evidence." Now it was my turn to visit her. I had originally intended to mock her as she had mocked me in my previous life, to vent my anger properly. But seeing her bloodless face, I suddenly found it rather tedious. She, however, upon seeing me, reacted like encountering a mortal enemy, her eyes bloodshot as she screamed at me. "Delilah, it's all you. You're the one who destroyed me. Why? Everything you have should have been mine. Your mother's position as primary wife, your status as legitimate daughter, and everything else. It all should have belonged to me. I was only trying to reclaim what was rightfully mine." These words she had also spoken to me before my death in my previous life. Only then, she had Reginald's backing and was at the height of Rowan's favor, radiant with success. She was completely unlike now, resembling a madwoman. I frowned and shook my head. Tsk, pitiful. Perhaps she would have preferred my mockery to hearing those two words from my lips. She truly went mad, lunging at me to strangle my neck. At that moment, the door behind me was suddenly kicked open. "How long will you continue this tantrum?" Hearing Rowan's voice, Camilla instantly froze as if struck by lightning, standing rigid in place. Rowan had come bearing poison wine and white silk. I wasn't surprised in the least. Imperial dignity had never tolerated violation. Camilla's adultery and scheming to seduce a prince after successfully marrying into the royal family was tantamount to smearing ink across the imperial countenance. This man, Rowan, had always been thus, using any means to achieve his goals while keeping no useless people around him. With the Whitfield family's downfall, Camilla had no path to survival. This was my first encounter with him since my rebirth. His appearance was unchanged from my previous life, still inspiring an irresistible urge to punch him. Seeing me, a brief emotion flashed through his eyes before he expressionlessly fixed his gaze on Camilla. Though Camilla was foolish, she wasn't so stupid as to not understand the situation upon seeing poison wine and white silk. Faced with death, she finally knew fear and began pleading desperately. Even after I left the Imperial clan court, I could still hear her shrill screams. Rowan pursued me outside, while Camilla's curses continued unabated. Fawn rarely offered commentary, but this time she sighed. She brought it upon herself. Her words had barely faded when I heard Rowan's voice. "Wait." I had no desire to wait, but his stride was swift, reaching my path in a few steps to block my way. Though impatient, this wasn't the time to openly break with him. I could only force a smile at him. "Is there something else, Prince Huai?" Rowan remained silent, staring at me intently, his emotions unreadable. After a long moment, I heard him ask, "Delilah, have we met somewhere before?" The question was abrupt, leaving me somewhat puzzled. Why would Prince Huai say such a thing? Rowan's gaze remained fixed on me. I simply feel you're very familiar. I really didn't want to chat with him in the street like this. I stepped back to increase the distance between us. There are many banquets in the capital. Meeting once or twice isn't unusual. Also, for propriety's sake, please address me as Princess Yu or sister-in-law. After saying this, I ignored his reaction and departed with Fawn in our carriage. Even from a distance and through the carriage walls, I could still feel his knife-like gaze. I knew that look all too well. In my previous life, when he deceived me into carrying a false imperial edict to the frontier and sent me from the capital, he had looked at me with exactly this expression. Thinking of how that false edict had caused my grandfather to bear the stigma of a criminal official and face execution, my temples throbbed, and I couldn't help but mentally calculate. With Camilla's death, no matter how Reginald struggled, he couldn't cause much trouble. Once the Whitfield family fell, court dynamics would immediately shift. Those ministers who had secretly supported Rowan alongside the Whitfield family would gradually quiet down. Even Rowan would necessarily become much more subdued. He might wish to hide his capabilities and bide his time, plotting gradually. But how could I possibly let him have his way? If he wouldn't act, couldn't I force him to? Thinking this, I gently rubbed my temples and instructed Fawn. Send word to that person. Let's advance our plans. In autumn, the general defending Lanyu Pass discovered that the Chang nation was secretly amassing soldiers at the border. After several skirmishes, they found letters bearing Prince Huai Rowan's seal in the enemy general's camp. When this news reached the capital, the entire court was in uproar. Naturally, the letters were forged. The seals on those letters were recreated based on the patterns I remembered from my previous life. Though the letters were false, the secret communications between Rowan and the Chang nation's eldest prince over recent years were genuine. The envoy sent to the Chang nation had barely stated his purpose when the Chang eldest prince voluntarily handed over all their correspondence. After all, compared to cooperating with a Liang prince for uncertain future benefits, they preferred to add insult to injury during the kingdom's internal strife, stirring the muddy waters for their own profit. When evidence reached the capital, before His Majesty could make a decision, he fainted from anger. During this time, while the Mid-Autumn Festival approached, with the Emperor unconscious and Prince Huai's whereabouts unknown after his escape, the entire capital was filled with anxiety. Only Silas, lacking complex thoughts, insisted on dragging me to the annual Mid-Autumn night market. Unable to resist his entreaties, I accompanied him. While court was embroiled in bloody storms, the common people remained largely unaffected. The night market was extremely lively, crowded beyond belief. With so many people, I had originally grasped Silas's sleeve to avoid separation. Unexpectedly, the next moment, I found my hand enveloped by his large, warm palm. He pointed to a nearby candied hawthorn vendor and asked, "That looks quite good. Shall we buy some?" Yet his tone was entirely different from usual. Up close, I could even feel that his hand holding mine, from wrist to arm, was completely rigid. I found it rather amusing. Though we had been married for so long for unknown reasons, he had never approached me for consummation. As a prince, he should have had numerous concubines after coming of age, yet he still behaved like a naive youth, holding a woman's hand for the first time. Thinking this, I couldn't help but chuckle and nod. "Very well. If you like them, let's buy several strings." I don't know which nerve this struck, but his body stiffened slightly as he suddenly released my hand. "Good, you wait here while I go buy them." Then, red-eared and walking awkwardly, he headed toward the hawthorn vendor. I wanted to remind him of something, but before I could call out, a figure flashed before me, blocking my view. Immediately, my mouth and nose were covered by someone's hand, and I received a heavy blow to my neck. Before I could react, my vision darkened, and I lost consciousness completely. When I awoke, my hands and feet were bound. My eyes were covered with black cloth, and though I couldn't see, I could hear another person's breathing besides my own. I hardly needed to guess who it was. Prince Huai's hospitality is truly unique. Having his identity discovered, Rowan stopped concealing himself. He removed the black cloth from my eyes and smiled at me. I hadn't expected Princess Yu to be so clever. I truly underestimated you. I smiled back at him. I hadn't expected Prince Huai's methods to be so base. I underestimated you as well. My lack of fear seemed to surprise him. Aren't you curious why I would seek you out? I raised an eyebrow and asked in return, doesn't Prince Huai intend to use me to threaten Silas into helping you seize the throne? Rowan seemed amused by this question. He clutched his stomach, laughing for quite a while before suddenly asking, do you know? A few days ago, I suddenly had a dream. My eyelid twitched involuntarily. Instinctively, I guessed what he was about to say. True to my intuition, I heard him continue. In that dream, fourth brother died during disaster relief riots, fifth brother was stripped of power for unauthorized troop movements, and you married me, becoming my primary consort. My heart skipped 2 beats. After a moment, I heard my own slightly hoarse voice. It's just a dream. Surely Prince Huai doesn't take it seriously? He didn't answer, but slowly smiled and raised an eyebrow, asking, oh? Really just a dream? Rowan clearly didn't believe it was merely a dream. He rose and began pacing slowly, circling me twice. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but it was too real. So real, I couldn't help but doubt what was reality and what was dream. He spoke while suddenly crouching down, staring intently at me. Do you know? Originally, I could have ascended to that supreme position, but now I can only hide and flee, reduced to this state. I suspected fourth brother, I suspected fifth brother, but thinking it over, I realized I had overlooked one person whose trajectory was completely different from my dream. You. My heart tightened slightly, yet I maintained composure and asked, oh? What was I like in Prince Huai's dream? You? He suddenly smiled, reaching out to gently caress my cheek. In my dream, you were my primary consort. We were deeply in love and eventually ascended together to the positions of Emperor and Empress. I calmly raised an eyebrow at him. So, because I married Prince Yu instead, you suspect I'm the one who brought you to this state? He suddenly smiled, his answer watertight. You alone? If I'm not mistaken, there's someone behind you, isn't there? Though he hadn't answered directly, I knew he had guessed. He suspected I was working with someone behind the scenes to disrupt his plans. But he wasn't certain whether I, like him, knew the trajectory of our previous lives. So he was testing me, testing whether I retained memories of our past life. Originally, somewhat nervous, knowing his reason for capturing me actually brought relief. I raised an eyebrow at him and smiled. Since you know, capturing me surely isn't just to have me listen to these mystical tales, is it? Indeed, hearing this, he narrowed his eyes. Oh? So is the person behind you fourth brother or fifth brother? I smiled without diminishing my expression. Guess. Rowan wasn't stupid. In an instant, he perceived my intent. He snorted and asked, trying to stall for time, waiting for rescue? Seeing my silent confirmation, he actually laughed aloud. That simple-minded fool, Silas, has already been led elsewhere. You still expect him to rescue you? I smiled at him too. You said yourself that I have someone behind me. That being the case, why would you think the person I'm waiting for is Silas? As if to confirm my words, the sound of clashing weapons suddenly rang out from outside. Immediately after, Prince Yong's voice could be heard. Third brother, Mother Empress said that as long as you confess everything, she will certainly plead with Father Emperor on your behalf. When Prince Yang burst in with his men, Rowan already had his sword at my throat. The two brothers finally tore away their facade of fraternal affection, facing each other with cold hostility. Rowan laughed coldly. So it was you? When did fourth brother and Princess Yu become so close? He naturally didn't know that in my previous life, before my grandfather's execution, he had sighed to me. Prince Huai Rowan is narrow-minded. In competing for the crown prince position, he certainly won't spare Prince Qi. Though Prince Qi has talent, his methods are ruthless. He's definitely not the choice for a wise ruler. Unfortunately, Prince Qi has no desire to compete for the succession. If Prince Yang were still alive, he would be the most suitable person for that position. Only then did I suddenly understand Rowan's ambitions. Thus, on the first day of my rebirth, I secretly entered Prince Yang's residence and formed an alliance with him. He would petition in court to facilitate my marriage to Silas. I would strategize for him to sever Rowan's arm, the Whitfield family. Having experienced my previous life, I naturally knew that Rowan lacked maternal clan support and had only gradually gained a foothold in court through the Whitfield family. But Reginald was inherently a greedy quagmire. While Rowan thought to use Reginald to ascend to heaven in one step, Reginald could equally drag him into the mud. In this life, I had been prepared from early on. My grandfather had assigned me his capable disciple Fawn. Fawn was meticulous and highly skilled in martial arts. When Rowan thought he had abducted me without anyone knowing at the market, Fawn had actually witnessed everything. She had even secretly followed to discover his hiding place and sent word to Prince Yang. I wasn't surprised that Prince Yang would come to arrest Rowan. Rather, it was Rowan who seemed unable to accept it momentarily, his voice dark as he demanded, "Why does it have to be you? From childhood, Father Emperor favored and doted on you. Why must you monopolize all the benefits?" He even leaned close to my ear and asked through gritted teeth, "Why do even you choose him?" This was the first time I had seen Rowan lose composure in either of my lives. His tone grew increasingly agitated, his hands trembling slightly. Even the slightest pressure would cut my throat. Yet I felt no fear whatsoever. Instead, I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Since you had that dream, you should know exactly why, shouldn't you?" Rowan froze suddenly upon hearing this. "What are you saying? You're saying that my dream was—" I slowly curved my lips. "That's right. Everything in your dream actually happened. In my previous life, Prince Yang had died suddenly. After Prince Yang's death, the only person Rowan truly feared was Prince Qi, who was far away at the western Rong frontier alongside my grandfather, commanding 100,000 troops. So in the autumn of the same year when Camilla framed me, the Chang nation simultaneously launched warfare at Lanyu Pass. When news of my grandfather's serious illness reached the capital, I was beside myself with worry. I begged Rowan to allow me to visit my ailing relative at the western Rong frontier. To my surprise, he readily agreed, even thoughtfully arranging for me to travel with the messenger carrying imperial edicts to deploy reinforcements to Lanyu Pass. At that time, I never would have imagined that both the imperial edict and the messenger were traps Rowan had prepared for me. Only when my grandfather and Prince Qi retreated the Chiang forces and His Majesty's accusation arrived did I suddenly realize I had been used. My grandfather wouldn't suspect me, and Prince Qi wouldn't suspect my grandfather. Rowan exploited precisely this trust to eliminate the only obstacle to his ascension to Crown Prince. Unauthorized troop deployment without imperial orders was a crime punishable by clan extermination. Though Prince Qi was stripped of military authority and spared death, my grandfather, as the commanding general, had no possibility of escape. At that time, the messenger who had delivered the false edict had already hanged himself at home, leaving only a suicide note accusing me. I had no defense and no means of appeal. I could only watch helplessly as my grandfather's entire family was dragged to the palace gates for execution, and I was force-fed a cup of poison wine by Rowan, ending my life. Whether it was a dream or rebirth, Rowan surely knew these events. Almost instantly, he understood, asking through gritted teeth, "It really was you. You sought out fourth brother and together orchestrated sending Reginald for disaster relief, taking the opportunity to topple the Whitfield family. It was also you who schemed to expose my correspondence with the Chang prince, forcing me to this desperate state. People tend to lose focus when emotions run high. I had originally wanted to use his distraction to find an opportunity to escape, so I didn't deny it." "Exactly." Indeed, the next moment his voice became markedly unsteady. "I should have realized earlier, should have guessed it was you." "Third Imperial brother." Prince Yang seemed to want to counsel him to calm down first, but the moment he spoke, it seemed to further enrage Rowan. He suddenly applied pressure, the blade edge pressing against my throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Prince Yang immediately dared not move. Rowan, whether stimulated by my words or not, began speaking incoherently. "It should have been you who died, you and fourth brother and fifth brother. I should be the crown prince. I should be the emperor." With each word, the sword in his hand moved. "If that's how it is, let's die together. Perhaps dying will let us start over." As he spoke, he applied force, about to draw the sword across my throat. At that critical moment, an arrow shot through the air from outside, precisely striking his arm. In pain, he instantly lost strength. I seized the opportunity to push back hard with my hands, sending him directly into Prince Yang's encirclement. Only then did my taut nerves gradually relax as I looked toward where the arrow had come from. With this glance, I saw Silas with a fierce, bloodthirsty expression, his eyes crimson as he drew his bow aimed directly at Rowan's heart. Silas's second arrow struck Rowan in the chest, nearly killing him. Fortunately, he survived, was forcibly rescued, and imprisoned in the Court of Judicial Review to await His Majesty's awakening for final judgment. With the situation settled and Prince Yang gradually becoming a frequent visitor to the Yu Prince's mansion, everything seemed to have calmed down. Except for Silas, since rescuing me that day, he hadn't spoken a single word to me for an entire month. Whether I asked questions, feigned pitifulness, or tried various ways to amuse him, he never once opened his mouth. He remained expressionless, not even giving me a glance. This was my first encounter with such a situation, leaving me momentarily at a loss. It was Prince Yang who couldn't bear to watch anymore and said, either in persuasion or frustration, "Since sixth brother dislikes his wife, why not let me arrange for Mother Empress to grant you a divorce?" Only then did Silas's expression finally change. That night, he secretly crept into my room. Upon entering, he remained silent, lurking ghost-like in a corner, staring at me with wide eyes. While sleeping, I felt an eerie chill down my back. When I opened my eyes, I was nearly frightened to death. Even so, he continued staring at me expressionlessly without saying a word. Faced with this situation, having lived 2 lives, I felt somewhat helpless for the first time and couldn't help but sigh and ask, "What exactly are you angry about?" He finally spoke. "You clearly like fourth brother. Why did you still marry me?" I was slightly stunned and confused. When did I ever admire Prince Yang? If you don't like him, why would you help him? Why did Fawn send word to him first, instead of me? Do you know that if I had arrived even a moment later, I might never have seen you again? Though these were words of accusation, spoken by him, they carried a somewhat pitiful tone. Somehow, the image of him drawing his bow that day suddenly flashed through my mind. At that time, he had probably truly wanted to kill Rowan. His blood-red eyes had resembled a Rakshasa from hell, just like the bloodthirsty, cruel image described in rumors. But thinking that such an appearance was only because, as he said, he feared never seeing me again, my chest couldn't help but soften. When I spoke, even my tone had gentled. If I admired him, why would I marry you? This question seemed to stump him. He paused slightly, circling back to the original question. Yes, you clearly forgot even what you said about marrying me as a child, so why would you still marry me? Yes, I clearly... My quick tongue had reached the halfway point before I realized something was wrong. I frowned slightly. When did I ever say as a child that I... Before finishing the sentence, some images suddenly flashed through my mind. I was slightly stunned, vaguely remembering that I probably had said such a thing. It was on New Year's Eve when I was 8 years old, the year after my mother's death. That year, after being driven from the main courtyard by the secondary wife and Camilla to live in the woodshed, there was a period when they seemed to forget my existence entirely. Even on New Year's Eve, no one came to call me for the reunion dinner. Perhaps their harmonious scene was too glaring for me to bear watching, so I took 2 copper coins and quietly left the mansion. That night, the capital's night market was extremely lively. There were so many people that I didn't even notice when my purse was pickpocketed. Only when I stood before a candied hawthorn vendor and discovered my 2 copper coins were gone did I realize what had happened. The bright red candied hawthorns were truly beautiful. When my mother was alive, she would often buy several strings. She would always coax me to eat them, but I disliked the sour taste of the hawthorn beneath the sugar coating. Actually, not being able to buy them didn't affect me much, since I didn't really want to eat them anyway. Just as I was about to apologize to the vendor, I heard a youth's voice beside me. I've been watching you stand here for a long time. Do you like them? Looking up, I saw a richly dressed young man beside me. The youth had beautiful eyes, with a hint of blue in the black irises, not quite like the typical appearance of our kingdom's people. This made me somewhat wary, so I stared at him blankly without speaking. Seeing no response, thinking I hadn't heard him, he asked again, "Do you like them? I can buy you a string." I shook my head. My mother liked them. He asked again, "Where is your mother?" "My mother is dead." After I said this, the youth was obviously stunned. Seeming to think he had touched my painful spot, he said awkwardly after a while, "I'm sorry." At that time, perhaps his expression was too sincere, and I unconsciously let down my guard, shaking my head at him. "It's all right." Perhaps still feeling apologetic, the youth's tone became quite generous. "Then tell me, what do you want? As long as I can afford it, I can give you anything." Young me thought for only a moment before saying, "Then can you give me a husband?" At that time, I didn't really understand what a husband was, but under his slightly surprised gaze, I earnestly explained, "My mother said that the most precious thing in this world is a good husband. I want a good husband. Can you give me one?" He seemed somewhat troubled, scratching his head and saying, "That probably won't work." But seeing my disappointed expression, he immediately changed his words. "But when you grow up, you can marry me. I should be able to be a good husband." Perhaps his tone was too earnest, or perhaps the youth's smile was too intoxicating. I agreed almost without thinking. "All right." That night, the youth escorted me to the back door of the Whitfield mansion. Upon parting, he seemed to say something about remembering his words. But the secondary wife was waiting at the back door then, and upon seeing me, she immediately began cursing loudly. Her voice was so loud that I couldn't hear what the youth had said at the time. Life continued, and the chance encounter of youth, along with words that couldn't even be called a promise, I didn't take to heart. As I grew older, I even forgot about that night's encounter and the youth I met. But unexpectedly, he had always remembered. The aggrieved Silas before me gradually merged with the youth in my memory. I couldn't help it. My heart grew increasingly soft, and my nose tingled with emotion. Not wanting him to notice my reaction, and without waiting for his response, I moved inward on the bed and patted the empty space, indicating, "Come up first." He seemed somewhat tempted, but after walking forward 2 steps, he stopped again, his expression hesitant. I didn't persuade him, simply lying down directly. After a long while, I felt the bed beside me sink slightly. Sensing the warmth beside me and his deliberately maintained distance, his slightly rigid body, my heart grew increasingly tender. Finally, I couldn't resist. I turned and gently kissed his forehead, then nestled into his embrace. "I'm sorry." My voice was very soft. It was an apology for forgetting him and also for not considering his feelings. He didn't react for a long time. Just when I thought he hadn't heard me, he suddenly held me tightly in return. Then came his somewhat domineering murmur, "I'll let it pass this time, but there won't be a next time. Anyway, since you married me, you can only be mine." I nestled further into his arms, slowly curving my lips and nodding in agreement. "All right,